Welcome to another installment of the Veggies and More Q&A series. For those who don't know me, I'm Alina, a registered dietitian, and on this channel I share plant-based nutrition tips and advice for busy families. Today I'd like to cover a topic that gets brought up pretty frequently in one form or another, and to do so I'll jump right into the question that I received about it, which is the habit that I would like to hear about from you is actually not one I'd like to put in place, but rather one that I would like to break, and that is ending every one of my meals with a sweet dessert. I'm pretty sure I'd feel and look better if I didn't eat so much sugar. I found this question really interesting because, as it so happens, many of my clients struggle or have struggled with reducing the amount of sugar that they eat or reducing the amount of sugar that they crave. But I also find this question really interesting because it can apply to cravings as a whole, so not just to sugar cravings. So if you're struggling with sugar cravings or cravings in general, in this video, I want to outline 3 simple steps that I'd recommend you start with when wanting to tackle this challenge head on. First, make sure that you're eating frequently enough. Sometimes sugar cravings arise from your body simply requiring a little bit more energy or being truly physically hungry, and this may occur because sugar or glucose is your body's preferred source of energy, so your body tends to run on glucose, your brain as well. So when you're feeling physically hungry, your body will conjure up images, very often, of sugar-rich foods. But the thing is, your body doesn't really distinguish between foods that are rich in processed sugars and foods that are rich in natural sugars. And very often my clients report getting cravings for very specific processed sugar-rich foods like chocolate or cookies or ice cream, but not so often for foods that are naturally rich in sugar or that may provide just as much sugar but in a natural form, like beans or lentils or fruit or whole grains. That's very typical. But one way to help reduce those cravings as a whole is to make sure that you're not physically hungry. And one way to do this is to make sure that you're eating frequently enough. And when I'm talking about frequently enough, usually it means planning a meal every 3 to 4 hours and a snack somewhere in between, so maybe 1.5 to 2 hours after a meal. Of course, if you're not hungry for that snack, you don't have to force yourself to eat it. But many people find it helpful to have that snack because without the snack, they might get to their next meal overly hungry and then eat it super quickly and then have cravings afterwards. So if you find yourself not hungry between meals, but getting to your next meal and being so hungry that you're able to or ready to basically inhale it, then I would suggest that you try to have a small snack in between your meals just to make sure that you prevent that situation from occurring. Another point I want to touch upon is that you try to eat as slowly as possible, because eating slowly gives your taste buds the possibility to notice that they're eating something, which of course can make you feel more satisfied after your meal, and in turn can also prevent cravings later on. So when I'm talking about slowly, I suggest at least 15 minutes per meal and somewhere around at least 10 minutes per snack. And I know this is easier said than done, so it might be something that you have to work on. For myself, for example, I have found that eating with chopsticks whenever possible is something that helps me slow down because I also have a natural tendency to eat my meals and my snacks really quickly. But just try to find whatever works for you, whether that's putting down your fork in between each bite or perhaps putting a timer to remind yourself of how long you're taking to eat. But it's really worth giving that a shot as well. The second step I'd like you to consider is feeding your body the right combination of foods. Eating the right combination of foods can help your meals feel more satisfying, which in turn can help keep hunger at bay for longer. And this, of course, can also help diminish cravings over time. So when I'm thinking of the right composition of meals, I like to use a plate visualization method with my clients, and I'm going to share it with you because I find it very helpful. So here's what I want you to do. Think of a plate when you're trying to plan your meal, and on this plate, I want you to fill half of it with fresh produce, like fruits or vegetables. Then 1/4 of your plate with a protein-rich food, such as tofu or lentils or beans or peas, etc. And then the other 1/4 with a source of complex carbs, for example, whole grains or starchy vegetables like potatoes or sweet potatoes. And of course, you can add a touch of fatty foods like vegan mayo or oil or sauces, or even foods that are naturally rich in fat like avocados or olives or coconut. But try to keep this to a minimum. It should be an addition to your meal rather than it take a significant proportion of your plate. And making sure that your meals contain a sufficiently large amount of fresh produce, which are fruits and vegetables, but also in combination with a complex source of carbohydrates and a source of protein, is what's going to help your meal keep you fuller for longer. And of course, going with this combination of foods can also help you get all the vitamins and minerals you need. So not only the macronutrients, but also the micronutrients your body needs to stay healthy on the long term. And what I want you to do is, once your plate is filled up in these proportions, eat as much as you need in order to feel satisfied. So if it takes 1 plate of food or 2 plates of food, that doesn't really matter. Your body should be able to tell you the amount that you need to eat of it, as long as it's in the right proportions. That's what really matters, and your body will naturally regulate the amount of food that you eat, as long as you make sure to eat slowly and to be conscious and mindful when you're eating. So looking at your food, really enjoying the texture and the flavors of your food, rather than watching a TV show at the same time or reading a book at the same time. Really focusing on your meal and your body's signals of hunger and satiety. When it comes to snacks, a good combination is a food that's rich in complex carbs together with a food that's rich in plant protein. This combination, again, is what's going to help your snack feel more satisfying and keep you free from hunger for the longest amount of time. So examples might include an apple with peanut butter, carrots with hummus, a soy-based yogurt with flax seeds and topped with some fresh fruit, or maybe a smoothie that you make from a soy or hemp-rich plant milk, because these have a bit more protein, together with fresh or frozen fruit. Or you can even have something like a roasted chickpeas, which naturally contain both complex carbs and protein. Whichever you choose, that combination is what you want to keep in mind. Now, the third step, and probably the most difficult to achieve, is to change your mindset around foods. Now that you've taken care of the physical reasons why you might be having cravings, you should also address the mental reasons why you might have cravings. And if you're still experiencing sugar cravings despite having taken care of the frequency in which you eat and the composition of the meals and snacks that you eat, it's very likely that the reason you're getting cravings is from a mental source. So what I've noticed over the years are that the 2 most common reasons why clients coming to me may be experiencing mental cravings have to do with restriction and with associations. So let's tackle restrictions first. And for that, I want you to ask yourself whether you perhaps consider certain foods as being good while others are bad, and whether you struggle to the same level or to the same extent stopping to eat foods that you consider good versus foods that you consider bad. So one example, do you struggle to not overeat broccoli, or do you struggle with broccoli cravings, versus do you struggle not to overeat cookies or to not crave cookies? Are they the same? Do you perhaps consider broccoli a food that's good and cookies a food that's bad? Thinking of foods as good or bad can be very unhelpful when it comes to cravings, because oftentimes it simply encourages you to crave the foods that you consider as bad more. What you try not to think about is often what you tend to think about most. If I tell you for the next minute, try to think of whatever you want, let your mind wander, and just really naturally think of whatever it wants to think, as long as you do not think about a pink elephant. The first thing that's about to pop into your mind very likely is a pink elephant. And that's because what you try not to think about is what your mind tends to automatically gravitate to. So if you try to tell yourself, I should not be eating cookies. I'm going to go on with my cookies example. So if you tell your mind cookies are bad, I shouldn't be eating cookies, your mind tends to naturally start craving cookies more, just because it knows that it shouldn't be having it. So if you find this to be the case for you, I encourage you to try to stop thinking of foods as good or bad. Of course, there are foods that are more nutrient rich than others, and others that provide you less nutrients, but try to think of the foods that are nutrient poor or less nutrient rich as foods that should be mindfully enjoyed once in a while, that bring you pleasure, and that are not foods to avoid, but rather foods to consciously enjoy every time that you do eat them. And what tends to happen when you start thinking about foods this way is that you naturally allow yourself to have them more often. Not automatically, not right away. This is not something that's super easy to do. And oftentimes my clients report that they're very scared that if they start allowing themselves to eat the foods that they have previously considered as bad, they'll end up wanting to only eat those foods all the time, overeat them, and end up eating them even more often than before. And while this may happen, in the beginning at least, over time, allowing yourself to enjoy these foods making them a part of your diet, not thinking of them as foods that you shouldn't be having, but really being mindful every time you eat them. So tasting them, eating them slowly, focusing on the flavor, focusing on the texture of the food helps you dissociate that food from something that you should not be having and helps you feel more fulfilled from a smaller portion of that food. And over time, naturally, if you do this consistently, you will start craving these foods less regularly or to a less intensity. Second most common reason I've noticed for people craving sugary foods or any other type of food, despite not being physically hungry for them, is that they've created unhelpful associations with food. For example, an association might be that you tend to eat popcorn every time you watch a movie, or that you tend to have ice cream after a stressful day at work in a way to de-stress, or that you might want to have chips after an argument or a particularly emotion-filled day with your kids. So these are all associations. So every time that you are watching a movie, your mind is more likely to start craving popcorn. Or when you have a stressful moment, your mind may be more likely to start craving for ice cream. Or when you had a fight with your partner or dealt with an emotion-filled day with your kids, you're more likely to crave chips. These are only examples, but I'm sure you get the idea and the gist of it. So the way to tackle this is to try to replace the food with something non-food related, but that provides the same emotion. For example, you could think of any way to de-stress that doesn't have to do with ice cream, whatever that is for you, perhaps listening to a podcast or taking a bath, or perhaps to reduce feelings after an argument or after dealing with big emotions from your kids. You might consider going for a walk or going in the garden and doing a little bit of gardening, whatever that looks like for you. But the idea is to replace the food with a non-food activity. And the best way to do this is to sit down and really make a list of all sorts of activities that might bring you pleasure or that you might find de-stressing or that can help cure boredom, because some people tend to associate boredom with eating. So whatever the associations you think you have created, try to figure out ways to deal with the feeling that the food would be providing you with in a way that's non-food related. And writing them down is really important, because when you are in that moment, it may be very difficult to come up with an alternative to eating that bag of chips or those cookies or whatever it is for you. But if you have it written down on a list, you simply have to look at the list and try one of the activities. And that's what I suggest. So start by trying one of the activities. Does it take away that craving? If so, it was very likely a mental craving for food. And if not, maybe try another activity, or perhaps just do enjoy the food, but enjoy it mindfully by really focusing on every bite and the texture and the flavor of the food that you are eating, so that it goes back to the first point that I've just mentioned, so that you really feel fulfilled by that experience. Over time, these new associations are likely to take over and your old cravings are likely to decrease. Now, if you want more tips and helpful resources regarding eating mindfully, I'll put a few of them down below in the description box so you can get started with them if you have interest in that. And if this is a topic you'd like for me to create more content on, give this video a like or let me know in the comments below so I can take note of it. And with that said, I hope that you found this week's video helpful. And until next time, ciao, ciao!